Donald Trump is about to face congressional elections. Internal tests will begin, and attention will be focused on his actual actions, including his achievements in resolving the situation in Ukraine. 100 days have passed, a day has passed, and several times 2 or 3 weeks have passed. Americans may ask, where are the results? This may affect his electoral prospects. On the one hand, foreign policy has a minimal impact on elections in the United States. On the other hand, the midterm elections are formally considered local. However, in the presence of Donald Trump, they are turning into a referendum on him, despite the fact that his name is not on the ballot. To achieve the result, it is necessary for Trump's supporters to come and vote, even without his direct participation.
И при этом Трампа не будет в избирательном бюллетене. Поэтому нужно, чтобы люди были с его точки зрения за него и пришли и проголосовали, несмотря на то, что его там нет.
That is why all congressmen and senators from the Republican Party must get Donald Trump's support to win the primaries. This process is now beginning to unfold. With each election cycle, the Republican Party becomes more and more Trumpist. During meetings with voters, party representatives face a high level of tension and aggression.
Республиканская партия становится все более и более трампистской партией. И сейчас, с одной стороны, когда они встречаются с избирателями, то на них кричат очень много. Потому что, довели, испугали людей, перепугали. Трамп очень большие перемены сделал, а в Соединенных Штатах мы не любим, когда большие перемены происходят быстро.
Society is scaring us, we want calm and moderation, and Donald Trump has taken actions that have people screaming in terror at congressmen trying to leave. Steve Bannon said that congressmen should go out to the crowds, engage in dialogue with them, and promote the president's bill, as this is what he expects to win the midterm elections on. This is a bill that would strengthen the immigration police and redistribute the tax burden in favor of wealthy citizens.
Потому что там, великий Big Beautiful Bill, который увеличил нашу иммиграционную полицию, перекачал налоги снизу вверх, отдал их богатым.
The president proposed a draft law that did not contain any provisions related to Ukraine, but included measures such as tax breaks for wealthy citizens. Lawmakers decided to support the president despite voter dissatisfaction, as the document proved to be extremely unpopular. Steve Bannon called for the bill to be promoted among the population. In this context, Ukraine is perceived as a benchmark, as its example makes people think that the president is acting in the interests of another country. For citizens who feel a sense of national pride and respect for their own country, this is a deep disappointment.
И вот это для людей, у которых есть гордость за страну, фундаментальное такое понимание чести, собственной национальной гордости.
The way the president handles the Ukraine issue matters. In some districts, especially closer to Washington or in Virginia, where there are more foreign policy experts, it may play a more prominent role. In states like Montana or Wyoming, where there is only one representative in Congress, the pressure is growing, especially in connection with the Jeffrey Epstein case. The White House launched a TikTok page after the break.
Там ее будут покусывать, сейчас их всех очень кусают из-за дела Эпштейна. Белый дом запустил, наконец, у них был перерыв, запустили страницу в ТикТоке. Потому что, в общем, да.
This is a serious problem, as they were bombarded with comments on the Jeffrey Epstein case. Donald Trump has a lot of problems, and their number is growing over time. More and more people are expressing dissatisfaction with his policies and their consequences, not only in the context of Ukraine. Ukraine has become an additional indicator of Trump's failed approach to governance. He ignores reality, fired an advisor who gave him real unemployment figures, and accepts recommendations from Vladimir Putin on democratic procedures, including the abolition of mail-in voting.
Это человек, который берет советы у Путина о том, как нам лучше вести свою демократию и что не надо голосовать бюллетенями по почте.
It is not certain that Donald Trump will not initiate a military conflict. He expressed joy in a conversation with Volodymyr Zelenskyy, discussing the possibility of starting a war in which the elections could be canceled. However, in the history of the United States, even during the Civil War, elections were held, and Abraham Lincoln won re-election. Holding elections in the midst of an internal conflict is a difficult situation. The situation with the president remains unstable. On the one hand, it is necessary to prepare for the elections, and on the other hand, to protect the very possibility of holding them. The worse things go for Donald Trump, the more aggressively he reacts. His desire to end the war as soon as possible is not due to the expired deadline, but to the pressure caused by the Jeffrey Epstein case and his desire to win the Nobel Prize. Donald Trump believes that he has no problems, and he demonstrates this publicly. He published a photo in which he drew a parallel between himself and Richard Nixon, as well as between Vladimir Putin and Nikita Khrushchev. He compared his conversation with Putin to a 1959 episode at the American National Exhibition in Sokolniki Park in Moscow, where an impromptu argument between the U.S. Vice President and the USSR leader about the merits of capitalism and communism took place at the model kitchen stand. This photo became a symbol of the Cold War in a domestic context. Trump uses such parallels to emphasize his importance and historical role, comparing himself to figures who have influenced global politics.
Импровизированный спор между вице-президентом США и руководителем СССР о преимуществах капитализма и коммунизма. И вот это фото стало символом холодной войны на бытовом языке. А зачем сейчас Трамп проводит вот такие параллели и пытается сравнивать себя с Никсоном?
It is unclear why Donald Trump recalled the episode with the Sokolniki exhibition, given that this moment in history is not widely known in the United States. More often, people remember Nikita Khrushchev stamping his boot at the United Nations and saying the phrase, "We will bury you." The question arises as to who is supplying Trump with such historical parallels. At the same time, there is a real problem: the confrontation between capitalism, democracy, and authoritarian regimes.
С другой стороны, действительно есть реальная проблема в том, что есть капитализм, есть демократии, есть авторитарные государства.
And the capitalist model is used in both democratic and authoritarian states. Comparing systems comes down to the question of which one is more effective in solving the problems of citizens. An example is South Korea and North Korea. In the current environment, Donald Trump is destroying the democratic system to the extent that more and more people are considering China as a possible alternative for implementing large-scale projects, or are looking to Europe as a refuge to preserve democratic values.
До такого уровня, что большее количество людей либо смотрит на Китай как возможный заменщик каких-то больших проектов, либо смотрит на Европу как место, где убежище сейчас вот той самой демократии.
It is difficult to hope for the United States to play the role of Richard Nixon, given that in American history he is perceived either as a criminal or, from Donald Trump's point of view, as a weak leader who was asked to leave to avoid impeachment. Nixon was in Moscow, and now Trump is going there. It seems that he is oriented in this direction. In this context, an image arises of Viktor Yanukovych, Bashar al-Assad, and Donald Trump entering a bar, a drink of former dictators.
Знаете, мог бы рассказать, как, да, заходит в бар этот самый Янукович, Асад и Трамп, и, значит, есть, да, напиток бывших диктаторов.
The situation looks strange, especially given that we are talking about the United States. It seems that for Americans it does not matter if the head of state is a spy, acts in the interest of another country, or has sympathy for the leader of an authoritarian regime in Russia. The main thing is whether he is perceived as an effective manager. If the economy is growing and citizens are getting richer, then cooperation with Russia is perceived as acceptable. But if things are going badly, then there is indignation. Is he also working for Russia? It all comes down to personal well-being, as there is no threat to national security at the general level.
Поэтому как-то все это начинается с личного состояния человека, потому что мы не чувствуем ту угрозу для нашей национальной безопасности на общем уровне.
If Donald Trump maintains friendly relations with Vladimir Putin, this is not perceived as a direct threat to national security as long as it does not affect everyday life. However, rising gasoline prices caused by tariff policies are leading to a decline in living standards. If Trump's economic strategy causes uncertainty and companies stop investing, it undermines stability. As a result, democracy is weakened, Trump's popularity falls, and he seeks to first destroy the system and then present himself as its savior. This is a trick that is hard to find a historical analog for. Either Nero destroys Rome and plays the violin, or Mustafa Kemal Ataturk puts the state back together. Being both is an extremely difficult task. Donald Trump has his own reality. He is a naked king, looking in the mirror and saying, "I'm more beautiful than ever," surrounded by people who reassure him, "Sir, you are beautifully dressed." This is what the current administration looks like.
Вау! Вот такая у нас администрация.